I don't know if you remember or not, but Brother Gary brought a lesson about when the children of Israel were fighting a war, and when he was holding his hands up, they were winning. Whenever his hands started to drop, they started losing. And the deal was that one man stood on one side, one man stood on the other side to help hold his arms up. And Gary brought to our attention that we as Christians need to help hold one another up. That is what Christians do. And I thought about that lesson and thought about it. And I wanted to bring something that I thought all of us could benefit from, but maybe me more so than anybody else. I ask you a question. What does faith mean to you? What is your faith? Is it strong? Is it weak? Do you have a faith? I want to bring some people to mind that were very young. If you'll remember in the Old Testament how that the Babylonians came in and they took many of the children of Israel back to Babylon. And they were there for some 75 years. They took all ages with them. And there was 4 young men that were taken. They were around the age of 16. We have Jacob and Nathan. I think they're 15. Is that right, boys? Brittany is 17. I think Bo is 15. Can you remember what it was like, what you were like when you were 15, 16, 17 years old? Do you know what kind of faith you had at that age? I've lived so long I can barely remember those days except the times when I got in trouble. But we have many stories in the Bible that teaches us about faith. You know, the Apostle Paul, how he continued to believe and he kept his faith because he knew what lay in store. Peter, Abraham, Caleb, Moses, Stephen, Joshua. We've talked about these in Bible class either on Sunday or Wednesday night. And I want us to think about Daniel tonight. Daniel was about 16 years old when he was taken captive back to a land that he knew nothing of. And Daniel was not by himself. There were many young people that were taken. But Daniel chapter 6, it talks about what Daniel did. But if you go to chapter 1, you will see how all of this takes place. There was another young man that was sold into slavery by the name of Joseph. And Joseph was down in Egypt by himself he didn't have 3 or 4 other guys to go with him. He was by himself. And what was it like for him? Did he lose his faith in God even though his brothers had forsaken him and sold him? But we see how, in Joseph's story, how things turned out for Joseph. He wound up being number 1 underneath the Pharaoh. And we're going to see how Daniel is number 1 underneath King Nebuchadnezzar. But what made this possible for those guys? We know that God was involved, and we know that God had a plan. But yet, we see what happened. Let's go through the first 4 verses of chapter 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, and some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and the literature of the Chaldeans. Folks, at age 16, that probably would have left me out. I mean, I was not a perfect A student, and I had other things that I wanted to be involved in rather than school. And so that's where I spent my, free time, was in the woods, hunting and fishing. And yet, here these guys are. In verse 6, from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And of course, those last 3 names is Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, is how I remember those names. But their Jewish name was that, and they were given different names by King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel was also given a different name. And as we look through verse 8, these men now have been picked. There's 4 guys out of all of those that were taken into captivity that kind of stood out maybe, and they were picked to serve the king. And verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Had I been captured, hey, we're getting to eat what the king eats. Bring it on. I want more of it, But it goes to show you where their faith was. It was not in the king's delicacies. It was in their God Almighty. And so, as we look and we see how things happen, and of course Daniel, he made a deal with the eunuch that was chief over all of these that they were trying to groom to be servants in the king's house. And the eunuch was upset with him. He said, look, it's going to be my head if you don't eat this and look good and are healthy. The king's going to be upset with me, and then I will be punished. Daniel made a proposition with him. He said, let us eat the fruits and the vegetables that we know, and in 2 weeks' time, if we're not what we need to be, then things will be different. And so the eunuch decided to do that. Verse 19. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king. So can you see what the providence of God is doing here? He's working. He is involved in there. And, of course, these 4 young men have shown that they have a good, strong faith in the living God. They are very familiar with God and what He can do. If you turn over to chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And he is going to have all of the wise men destroyed because he gathered them together. He had this dream, and he said, Mickey, tell me what this dream is. And Mickey said, how can I interpret the dream and I don't even know what the dream is? He wouldn't tell anybody what he dreamed. He wanted someone to tell about the dream and to interpret the dream. And of course his wise men and nobles said, nobody can do that. No king has ever asked this of anybody. Tell us the dream and we will explain it to you. No, you tell me what I dreamed. Okay. Is there anybody in here that can read one another's minds? My wife does a pretty good reading mind, but, I can't tell what y'all are thinking right now. And so, for me to be able to tell you what you're thinking and what the interpretation would be, I can't do it. Neither could none of these nobles and wise men back under King Nebuchadnezzar. But the king said, destroy them all. If they can't tell me they're no good to me, let's just get rid of them. In verse 24 of chapter 2, therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. And in verse 28, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the vision of your head upon your bed were these. Daniel is going to interpret the dream. And of course, he goes through and he interprets it. And if you look down to verse 32 to 35, he tells King Nebuchadnezzar about the image that he saw, the head of gold, the chest and the arms of silver, and the rest, in bronze and iron and clay. He tells him about this, and then he tells about a stone that is being hewn without hands. And it comes in and destroys the feet, and of course it all gets mixed up. If you go through and you read this, you can understand where this is going. But of this image, the head was of gold. And Daniel told him, "You're the king that is the gold head." And he tells him all about it. If you stop and think, Nebuchadnezzar almost ruled that whole entire area when he was king. But things happen and things change and things go from good to bad sometimes. But as you go on and you see, Daniel and his friends are promoted. Daniel is promoted, and then he gets his friends to come in with him. And so they're in good shape now. We're moved up. Sort of like the Jeffersons. I don't know if y'all ever saw that TV series, but how he was moving on up. He was in a penthouse. He was moving on up, you know. Well, everything's going good until chapter 3 and verse 8. And they defile the king's edict. And of course it was that they were to worship the king. And they refused to do that. And the point was, if you don't fall down and worship the king when you hear the trumpets and all of these instruments in symphony, and if you don't bow down to the king, they're going to kill you. We have people in other countries today that if they didn't denounce God or Christ, that they had their heads cut off. Stop and think about, guys, if you were 16 years old, how would you react to this? Now, I don't know how much time has passed from the time that they were taken into captivity till now, but I imagine it's been a while. But still, how would you react to that? But it goes to show you the faith that they had. You never know how you're going to react to a situation until the situation happens. Our government trains our military in all kinds of scenarios. EMS, they train for all kinds of scenarios. Sheriff's Department, police departments, they train. If this happens, this is how you are to react. So they have a plan of how to do this. At age 16, I didn't have a plan for anything except when the next meal was going to be. But yet, here they are. And they will not bow down to this image that was created. I think it was some 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide, made of gold. And I don't know if it was solid gold. I doubt it. Probably overlaid in gold. This is just my assumption. It just said an image of gold. But they were to bow down and to worship this. These 4 guys would not do it. But Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego were put on the chopping block. They were brought before the king. And it made the king mad. Hey, if you're not going to worship me, then away with you. And, you know, they said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to worship you. We worship the living God. And I'm paraphrasing now. But, in essence, if our God does not take care of us, we're still not going to worship you, because we believe that our God is the one that we should worship. And as a result, the king is mad, he's upset, and he has them all bound. And, you know, because of their attitude, let's make this furnace 7 times hotter. I started to bring a match and to strike it and to get a couple of these boys up here to put their finger over it and see if it burned, you know. and how quickly it took them to get their finger away from it. But you know what? You can take a match, strike it, let it burn, blow it out, and then immediately put your fingers on what's left, and it's still going to burn you. So, for this furnace to be 7 times hotter than normal, what was that going to do? And you have seen, I don't know if you have seen, but I have seen people that were burned up, and it's a gruesome sight. Terrible. But they bound these guys and they threw them in the furnace. The furnace was so hot that the men that the king had told to throw these 3 guys in there, the flames even burned them and killed them, consumed them. And then Nebuchadnezzar is looking around and he says in verse 25 of chapter 3, "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th one is like the Son of God." How did Nebuchadnezzar know what the Son of God looked like? Have you ever thought about that? I don't know. But it must have been something, the way that the 4th one appeared in there, that it must have had something miraculous looking for King Nebuchadnezzar to say that looks like the Son of God. But they weren't hurt. And he brings them out. In verse 26, "Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and smoked, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God." Now, do you see how he's changing here a little bit? The Most High God is now in his mind and in his vocabulary. "Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire." And in verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him." Folks, where is your faith? How do you trust in God? Do you believe that God is going to do what he says? Do you have the faith that when time comes, God is going to do what he says? Do you believe John chapter 14, where it says, "I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to receive you as mine"? Do we believe that? If we don't, why? Is it not real to us? Why did God have this book of Daniel through the powers of the Holy Spirit to write these things for us? Verse 29, we talk about what one man can do. Look what happens. "Therefore, I'll make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Here you have a heathen king, and he's making this decree for what happened to these 3 men. He saw it with his own eyes. You know, we think, if I could only see Stephen, when he was being stoned, he looked up into heaven. He could see the Son of God standing by the throne in heaven. What a glorious thing that must have been. even though he was being stoned to death, and I don't know how many stones it took, and I don't know if they had a pile of stones here, so when somebody was given the death sentence to be stoned to death, that they marched them out and everybody had a pile of little stones for them to throw at the person or not. I don't know. But whenever I was a kid and I would be in a rock fight, it hurt when you got hit with a rock. And if you got hit in the head, it really hurt. But here, these men didn't see, or it's not recorded that they saw anything. But they must have known that God was in there with them, or the angel was in there with them. As we go on, Nebuchadnezzar has a second dream in chapter 4. We're running out of time, but I want to try to get through this because we see the faith that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego had. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. He calls on Daniel, and Daniel has been given the name Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God. Evidently, Nebuchadnezzar had a God that he had that name, and he had given that name to Daniel. But as it goes on, we see that the king had a dream, and Daniel is brought to testify and to tell the king what he saw and so forth. In verse 34 of chapter 4, and at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed him most high, and praised and honored him who lives before forever. Nebuchadnezzar was also stricken, and he was having to graze and eat the grass, just like the beasts of the field. But after a time, he was brought back to his senses, and he was made king again. But in all of this, there is another dream. And of course, the dream was that there was a tall tree, and it grew so tall that everybody could see it. But it was cut down. And it goes through and explains all of this. The people, can you imagine what the nobles and so forth thought of these foreigners? They come in, and now look where they are. They're up in hierarchy. That's where we should be. And so they get the king to sign a declaration. And the Medes and the Persians, once the king signed that, it could not be reversed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this. It was a mistake. No. Once the decree was made and the king signed it, it was sort of like you could take it to the bank. This is a good check. And anyway, this decree was that they had to worship King Nebuchadnezzar. And of course, Daniel, he went and he prayed 3 times a day. And he looked towards Jerusalem and he prayed. And of course, all these spies around. And they went to the king and told him Daniel was not doing this. And so the king brought him in and had him bound, and he was thrown into the lion's den. I told you a little bit about a lion and how strong they are, how even a bullet, the muscles are so strong and so tight that sometimes even a bullet does not penetrate very far into the cavity of a lion. That's how strong their muscles are. And yet Daniel killed one with his bare hands. But yet, here Daniel is, Did I say Daniel killed one? Samson killed one with his bare hands. I saw some people looking at me like, what are you talking about? But Samson killed it with his bare hands. Here Daniel is. He's being cast into the lion's den. And of course these lions, they're not always, fat and sassy. We used to have a cat in our house, and a mouse could walk across the sidewalk there, and the cat would just look at it. He might swat it or play with it, but that was it. He never was hungry enough to eat a mouse. Yet, these lions were not fed like that. And they were hungry, and that was one of the punishments that they would give them. King Nebuchadnezzar did not want to have to throw Daniel in. But he signed the decree. And he couldn't go back on his word. In verse 3 of chapter 6, then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. In verse 5, these are the people that were trying to trap Daniel. We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. How many of us could be found guilty of not following the commandments of God? How long would they have to follow us around? Oh, David, you didn't do this. I thought that's what you believed. I thought that's what you preached. But yet you're not doing it. In verse 7, all the governors of the kingdom and administrators and satraps, the counselors and the advisors gave counsel together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitioned any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. And okay. In verse 9, therefore King Darius signed the written decree. And we know the rest of the story. They're following, they're watching Daniel. He's brought to the king. He didn't do this. He's watching. He's praying to his God other than you, O king. So he gives the order. Verse 20 of chapter 6. Now this is the king. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. What does that mean? A lamenting voice? Sorrowing. I wish, I hope that you're okay. I wish I hadn't had to do this. A sorrowful, spirit. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God. Here he is. He's recognizing Daniel's God, a living God. All the gods that had been there before were images. Why were the children of Israel in Babylonian to start with? Because of the idols, the idolatrous worship. And they let a nation more corrupt than them dominate them, bring them into captivity, and here they are, they're supposed to bow down and to worship other gods, but they didn't. Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Here this King Darius is asking this question. Daniel, are you okay? Are you all right? Did your God of the living, did he protect you? I didn't want to throw you in there, and I'm paraphrasing. I didn't want to throw you in there, but I signed this decree without thinking the thing about it was, King Darius, he liked everybody bowing down to him. I am somebody. Everybody bows down to me. But anyway, verse 21. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. Can you imagine what that was like to the ears of King Darius? Thank the living God that he is okay. That the lions did not do anything. In verse 22, my God, this is Daniel speaking, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me. Because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Daniel did not do wrong against the king. He just would not worship the king. And rightfully so. But what did it say? I was found innocent. Would we be able to say that today? I'm standing there. David, we didn't quite find you innocent. So therefore, when we throw you in the lion's den, you may have to fight for yourself. Because we're not going to shut the mouths of the lions. In verse 25 of chapter 6. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. He has made one decree that put Daniel in the lion's den, and now look at this decree. I'll make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, true, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? Here you have a heathen king making this decree. Can you imagine that going out and all the people that tried to get Daniel killed, and also his three compadres, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego? This took place. Daniel was a young man, and I don't know exactly the time, how many years has passed, but yet he was a young man. I venture to say that I don't think that I would have passed the test. I don't think that I would have made the cut. Because at age 16, I don't know. Yes, I believe that Christ was the Son of God, but I don't know that I was strong enough to stand up to proclaim this like Daniel and his three companions. If we stop and think about it, what is my faith? Is my faith as strong as it should be? Am I one that is holding up the hands so that the Lord's army can continue to fight? Or am I one sitting over there sleeping on the job? Am I one who is praising God because he is the God of the living instead of praising some man? Brothers and sisters, I don't know about you, but I've had relatives that fought in World War II, and what they gave their life for, and what we as Americans have fought and many Americans have given their life for, and yet in our own country, if we're not careful, we're going to be in the same shape as Daniel. God is still in charge, and He will bring a nation more wicked than us, if that's possible, and carry us into captivity. I haven't seen the vision. I don't know any of this, but I just know what God has done in the past. And how can we keep murdering babies and letting our people do so many heinous things and no punishment, no judgment? Kind of reminds me of the time when Noah preached for 120 years, and the Bible says that the people's thoughts were on evil continuously. I think that may be close to where we are today. But regardless, I hope that the lesson tonight has helped you to maybe look towards strengthening your faith and standing up for Christ when you have the opportunity. Witness for Him. And there may be some here that have not put Christ on in baptism. We always offer that invitation. As Michael explained this morning, you need to hear, you need to believe, you need to repent, confess Christ as the Son of God, and put Christ on in baptism. It's simple, it's not difficult, but it's the commitment that you have to make. And to have the strength to come forward and say, that's what I want to do. Or there may be some of here that need prayers of the family. Prayers of this family. Because things are going on in your life and you need people to help you and to pray for you. Just like Brother Gary's fixing to have surgery Wednesday. And there's already been many prayers up in his behalf. So God is already preparing the surgeons that will do the surgery for our Brother Gary. Because we've been praying for it already. But whatever your need may be, won't you come as we stand and sing?